Numerous MPs have branded the government's own plans to cut the asylum backlog incomplete and unrealistic, as they warn that efforts to do so will only worsen the crisis. I mean, how on earth can it get any worse? But the Public Accounts Committee has warned that adequate safeguards are not in place to protect against the risks to vulnerable people, and that genuine claimants may not have their application viewed properly. The report also claims that the Home Office has, quotes, no credible plan to end the use of hotels for migrants and faces a huge challenge to meet Rishi Sunak's pledge to do so. Right. Well, joining me now is Stephen Woolfe, Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. Stephen, thank you very, very much. Earlier on this week, it was, we're slashing the number of migrant hotels, we're 30% down in the Channel, look at us, we're doing everything great. And now it looks a lot like there's no plan and it's awful. What's happening?
Well, I think what you're seeing, actually, Patrick, is a very clear kind of misinformation that's coming from those who are looking at the statistics of the Home Office asylum progress. What we see is that only a few months ago, they were saying that there's a backlog of 130,000 asylum applications. And only recently, they're now saying it's 68,000. And so the only way that they could have got those numbers down was by allowing more asylum applications to actually be successful. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that there's a vast increase in the number of asylum applications being accepted in what's called the right to remain, but not because of what they classify as ECH or UN Refugee Convention asylum, but discretionary. They're allowing them in as discretionary reasons. And that is why they can also now say we can look to reduce the number of hotels.
OK, all right. Do you believe them, though? Do you believe them about the number of hotels? You know, this was good news for people, certainly in rural communities. There was a massive fear. A lot of people I know up north in rural communities, isolated communities, were saying, well, what happens if we clear this backlog, we say you can all stay, you've got 28 days to leave this hotel, and there's, 400 mostly men in a hotel in the middle of nowhere who are essentially going to be made homeless in 28 days' time. And that's a concern for any community, no?
But this is where the sticky plan comes into place, where all you're doing is removing them from the numbers of the Home Office, Patrick, because the moment that they say that you've been granted the right to remain in the UK for whatever reason, predominantly discretionary reasons, it's shifted on to that responsibility of the local authority. So the people may be regarded as homeless, living in whichever area of the United Kingdom, but the responsibility to house them now falls on the local taxpayers of that area and the local councils. And the government can wash their hands of it and say, look, we've done our job, we've granted them asylum. So it's now up to you to find a home for them.
Right, and that is the looming crisis, isn't it? I mean, people think that people think that the crisis is the issue going on in the Channel, so the risk to loss of life there for people, that humanitarian aspect of it. People also think, like Suella Braverman, that it's an invasion. So you've got two crises in one there, and then you've got the problem with the processing centres in Manston. Some people say, well, they're inhumane. Other people say, well, we shouldn't even have processing centres because people shouldn't be here. The list goes on. Then we've got the hotels. That's an issue. The cost to the taxpayers. But actually, I would argue the real problem is that we are staring down the barrel of mass migrant homelessness.
Well, it's not just mass migrant homelessness. It's also the effect that it has on the local communities who live there. Remember, we've got something in the region of 250,000 people who are living with their children in unfit conditions in hostels and B&Bs. And that's unacceptable, because what you're doing now is saying, OK, we've granted you right to remain, you can stay here. Now the council has to look for a home for you, but they've already got homeless people. They've already got people who are living on the streets or living in unfit accommodation. So what you have is a situation in this country where we're putting more and more people into the country with not enough accommodation, but the responsibility is now on the local authorities, not the government. That's the real crisis that's coming down the line.
No, indeed. Right, what would be so wrong with letting these asylum seekers work? OK, so they could earn a bit of money. I can see you chuckling a bit there. They could earn a bit of money. They could pay a bit of tax. They could maybe rent their own place. They wouldn't be relying on the state so much. Go on.
Oh, well, Patrick, this argument I've heard so many times. Let's look at some serious facts here. The fact is that in the last 10 years, 5 million more people have come into this country, and yet, we still allegedly have people not being able to fill the jobs. And that's because the government has made it easy for students not to actually have to work anymore. One of the big factors of why people aren't working anymore is because there are less students. And of course, we saw over 1 million people over the age of 50 say we don't want to work in the economy anymore. And they give lots of reasons. I spoke to some today who say we don't want to live in woke businesses, for example. But the reality of offering money and work to those who claim asylum here before they've even been granted asylum is very well known to be an attractive proposition for people smugglers, and it will just increase the numbers coming in.
OK, now, look, Stephen, I've got to ask you, just finally, of course, there is a little bit of other news in town for us today here at GB News. It's caused quite the stir. Boris Johnson's joining us, as I'm sure you've heard by now. So Boris Johnson is joining us. He's going to be doing a whole host of different things, you know, curating shows for us, doing our election coverage and, you know, having a look at global Britain, all of this stuff. What's your view on Boris? I mean, you know, divisive character. I'm sure you don't agree with everything he's said or done. You know, what's your take on it?
Well, look, I have a personal issue with Boris in that when I first entered the world of politics in a political party that was despised before I became independent myself, he was one of the only politicians that actually welcomed me and chatted to me when I was on the campaign trail. And he treated me like a human being, which is what people see about him. They see him as a decent individual who's willing to listen and is willing to chat. I also very engaging. I thought he was intelligent. He's got a lot to say to him, and someone who also likes the classics and poetry can understand where he comes in from, injects that into his speeches. I think he's a very successful individual who'll do really, really well for GB News. But more importantly, where I see it, two areas that he'll be successful. One is they bring in the centre of conservative politics to come and watch the channel and listen to him. Yeah. But also those who are northern like myself, who really felt that it was a coup against him to remove him as leader and voted for him en masse during the Red Wall. I think they too will want to see what he has to say and what he wants to do in the future on your channel and perhaps for himself personally.
Yeah, Stephen, look, thank you very much. Cracking stuff. And thanks for being a part of this show as well. Always great to chat to you. Take care.